Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you recognize the Cal Berkeley fight song and you're a Berkeley Bear, you will know and recognize that. But you might not know much about Scott Ball, the sports information director who was there for a quarter of a century. You're going to find out a little bit about him today. Welcome, everybody, to 100 Yards of Football. This is Take 5 with Steven Travers. I'm Harper LeBel. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. And, Steven, we've got ourselves a guest today who I am going to decipher this or dissect it, if you will, into it. There's a certain part of sports and media and the ability to overlap that in a way that kind of smoothly transitions the ability for any media to get all the information that they need about the players. Someone has to do that research. Someone has to put that down on paper. Someone has to be the one accountable for making sure that the statistics are correct, that the stories are accurate, and that the fanfare is all worth talking about, and that is Stephen Ball today, our Scott Ball, excuse me. Stephen, thank you for putting Scott on the air with us today. I appreciate it. There's so many things that we can do here today that are going to be of interest to any sports fan at all, and really dissecting what the difference is between the media and the players and the relationship between those two. So thank you for bringing Scott on with us today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks an awful lot, Harper. Scott Ball, he's a part of this unique year in my life, a transition year, if you will, between the years in which I was just doing other things and eventually transitioned into becoming a writer. And this was the year in which I was an assistant baseball coach, the bullpen coach for the University of California, which is the alma mater of my dad and my brother and really almost all of my family. I'm a USC historian, but I grew up at Berkeley. I grew up with Cal, and I made a lot of friends. And we've had a couple of them on the show. We had John Zuber on the show about a month or so ago. He was a great star on that team, and I've been put in touch with some other people who were part of that program at the time, who will be on this show probably before the summer is over. And it was just a very unusual time. And my guest, Scott Ball, he worked in the sports information department at Cal, and he was assigned to the baseball team. And I really saw and understood and admired the work that he put in because, you're up early, you've got to get everything ready before the game. You have to pay attention to everything that's happening during the game. This is before the internet. You've got to score the game. You've got to make sure the statistics are correct. Then you have to compile them. Then you've got to get them out to the media and to the fans after the game. And this is not something you're going to do by email attachment. This is usually by photocopy, fax machine, and I saw how hard people worked. I saw how hard people worked in the Dodgers press box, the Giants press box, USC's sports information office, and the Cal sports information office. And Scott became a friend of ours. We would make road trips, and I guess to save money, as I recall, it would be Scott, myself, and another assistant by the name of Bobby Ralston. And we would get stuffed into the same room. I think we've arranged to have like a roll-in bed, and I think I usually sleep in the roll-in bed, And I think I was the last man on the totem pole. They didn't even want to pay for me to have my own room.
Did you have the short straw, Stephen? Did you end up getting the short?
I was like the Kevin Pollak character in A Few Good Men, who goes, I have absolutely no responsibilities here whatsoever. I was down in the bullpen. One time I had the temerity to tell one of our pitchers some sort of advice on delivering the ball. Next thing I knew, Dave Lawn, our pitching coach, who probably is going to be on this show also, who I've stayed in touch with over the years, he was like, no, Coach Travers, no. All I want you to do is answer the phone, and if I raise my right hand, it means we're get the right hand up. Yeah. Your left hand means get the left hander up, and answer the phone and find out who's warm, and that's about it. I don't want you telling anybody to drop and drive or, get their arm up or get more on their follow through or any of these other sorts of things. So, and basically I threw batting practice and hit grounders. But Scotty would be in the room with us. Sometimes we'd have a few cold beers and we would shoot the breeze, talk baseball, and friendship developed. And over the years, I've stayed in touch with Scott. I've written books. I think he's read a couple of them. And I want to welcome the great Scott Ball from the University of California, Berkeley, and the Oregon State University, the Beavers, to Take 5 with Steven Travers. Scott, how are you doing?
Doing well, and I appreciate you having me on your show.
Absolutely. Well, the way we usually operate this, Scott, is Harper usually begins with, he usually digs into the early stuff, and then I'll get into some of my questioning for you. So Harper, Mr. Scott Ball, he's all yours for now.
Well, Scott, thank you again for being with us. As a sports information director, there are a ton of questions that I have dealing with them from a media standpoint. We'll get to that in just a moment, but sports in general, when did it begin for you? With childhood memories of some things that you did or said or had an idea or passion for when you were just a young kid? I know you played ball, but when did becoming a part of the academia in the college life of being able to put the pieces together between the media, between the players themselves, and developing that relationship that's so important between players and coaches and athletic directors and the people with microphones and with cameras?
Well, I was really fortunate because Corvallis is a small college town, and actually my neighbor was the head basketball coach for the men. My grandfather was team physician at Oregon State for athletics for about 29 years. So it was like almost from day one, I would know all these people. And I started getting media guides when I was like 8 or 9. And I didn't really realize that could be a profession, but I found that out later once I, basically I switched to technical journalism when I returned back to Oregon State, and that's what I graduated in. At that time, a friend of mine's father told me, hey, go tell sports information that you can do some help as a student, and that's all it took.
You're from Corvallis. Thank you. I appreciate you letting us know that. You're in Madison, Wisconsin now.
Correct.
But your ties and your roots back to the Oregon community, and I'm going to say it's a small town, and 20, 30, 40, even 50 years ago, it's not as developed as it is today. So what was that like for you reading that first media guide and having an idea of who these players are and little stories and intricacies about where they're from or what they did in high school or what they did their junior year going into a rising senior year that created a passion for you and a real interest in correlating between players and understanding them through the stories that you were reading?
Yeah, I think maybe I was a little unique that I was so much into maybe the personality of athletes and people more so than just the overall how the team was doing, because I think just knowing some of the coaches and then looking at those media guides and reading the bios and seeing the games, and I go, well, this player seems interesting, then I'll read more about him. I don't know if many kids really get that deep into it, but it really did influence. I was a lucky guy to be able to do that as my profession.
Yeah. What were the sports growing up that were of interest to you? Baseball, basketball, hockey? Did you do any soccer? What were the things that kept you busy as a youngster?
The football, basketball, baseball were the main things. We didn't really have hockey in Corvallis, and soccer, not such a big deal. But, it's kind of fun. Basically, I'm working on a story just almost for my own fun, but my sister's boyfriend when I was 9 was the Star High School fullback. And that really was exciting because when you're about that age, that's when you start seeing bigger than just your little league, right? You're seeing and appreciating teams. I think at that age, you're very impressionable. And that kind of got me going, I think.
Well, the collegiate aspect, obviously, with Oregon being what it is, a Trailblazer fan, probably basketball, there. But who was the football? Did you go up to Seattle? Was that the team that you rooted for, or San Francisco? What were the other sports that, from a professional standpoint, were important for you when you were growing up?
Well, professionally, I watched, all the ones on TV, but being in Oregon, there wasn't at that time until the Trailblazers, there really wasn't a professional team associated with Oregon.
Right.
But then when the Trailblazers came around, that was pretty exciting, and they were an expansion team that won the NBA title, and that was kind of like unique. And the Bill Walton and the Maurice Lucas and Johnny
Great
Davis,
Rhodes.
those
Yeah,
people were
right.
a lot of fun. And I was 17 when they won it, so I remember just being excited about it. And I think when they actually won it, we were on a baseball trip or something. We heard it happen.
Well, yeah, for obvious reasons, bringing a championship, an NBA championship, and having it locally. I know that and let's be candid, it was kind of a one and done. The team was getting better. Walton's health was always a factor. He had those foot issues and the injuries that kept him out for great lengths of time. But they win it, and then all of a sudden, the Trailblazers are not the big news, if you don't mind me saying. So there's Jack Ramsey, the coach there, and really legends all unto themselves in the area. But then Golden State wins a championship, and Seattle wins one. The Baltimore Bullets, if you'll allow me to say that without getting mad at me, because that's what they were called. There wasn't a dynasty. There was a series of different really good teams that ended up having playoff runs that made it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about football and baseball? You said you were on a baseball trip. Who was your baseball team growing up?
Well, again, I was really lucky because, say, when I was about 14, we got third in the state. And this will kind of age me, but I played against Danny Ainge.
Nice. Okay.
Danny Ainge was from Eugene. His team got second in the state. We got third. But, and not to name drop, but best player on our team was Harold Reynolds, who went on to be a Major League All-Star with the Mariners and, has done a few, stuff for ESPN, and then now,
the MLB Network. He's fantastic.
MLB Network.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
I played Little League against him, and then I was on these teams with him. We were also played on an American Legion team that got third in the nation in 1978.
Yes. So you could ball. Yeah, that's good for you. I love it. And did any of that sports personalization, I'll call it, because you were an athlete and you played, did that help in any way, shape, or form in tying in the questions that you would ask or the information that you would seek out? As a youngster, you would read media guides and learn little bits and pieces about players. Did some of that come into your knower, your knowledge, your ability to be able to, hey, I'm going to ask a different question of this young man because I think there's more to the story and I want to be able to get it out of him so that he can express it. We can let everybody know about his background.
Oh, I absolutely think so. I think there's a certain amount of sports information people that are non-athletes, right? And I think there's a certain amount that are, and I absolutely think it's an advantage to have played the sport. I think you can understand the athletes better. I'm not going to say I was a world beater, but I think I was a little bit closer to them than somebody who was just kind of some of the people in sports information just like sports, but they weren't particularly athletic.
Right. Well, with me, it's just a simple, and then what happened? Or really with a question mark at the end of it. Something that you say to somebody while they're sharing a story that allows them to know that not only are you listening, but you'd like to know a little bit more. If you're willing to tell it, those are the types of questions that I usually like to ask. And I probably won't do it here today because you'll laugh at me if I go, really? But nonetheless, your ability, especially from a baseball perspective, and then working with the sport and having players around and you know certain things, you can recognize, hey, this guy's got really good feet. Let's talk a little bit about his athleticism. You know what I mean? Or a guy that has
Yeah.
a big stick. You know, what's it like for you? Are you thinking home run every time, or what's your philosophy when you come up to the plate? You have different ways of asking questions because you played.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And, a lot of what I really enjoyed about sports is not just the sports, but maybe a bigger, wider, how that affects a person's life. A lot of and I've talked about this with other people, but some of the best students were student athletes at Cal. That always intrigued me because I thought that was really neat because these people were doing a great job with time management. Now, I might be straying away from your question, but yeah, I was thoroughly impressed with almost every single student athlete I encountered at Cal.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get to Cal, you're back to Corvallis. When high school finishes, did you know you were going to go to OSU, or did you have other ideas and different advantages that you could have taken to go to different schools? What was that like for you at getting probably around your sophomore or junior year of high school and realizing I not only want to go to school, but I want to be able to pick the place where I go?
Well, so this is how it happened. Is our Legion team that got third in the nation? The head coach of the Legion was the athletic director at the junior college. The
Okay.
assistant coach was the head coach at the junior college. So after that long summer, because our season went on way longer than most. There was only 2 weeks between the end of baseball in the summer before the practice began for junior college.
Wow.
I got invited to try out for the junior college, and I made the team. And that year, we got 8th in the nation in junior college. The following year, we got 6th in the nation in junior college. So we went to the Junior College World Series, which was at that time in Grand Junction, Colorado. I think maybe it still is.
Mesa? Yeah, absolutely.
So
right.
I was a lucky guy, and I think 4 or 5 people from our Legion team went on and played in that junior college team. And in fact, again, I don't want to toot my horn, but we're getting inducted into the Schools Hall of Fame in September. That 80 team.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So really, now, would you have considered a different 4-year school, or was, you know what, I'm not getting heavily recruited. I'm going to get my AA, get the degree, and then see where things go from there. Talk a little bit about what the playing experience was like for you.
Well, I was just happy to still be playing. I'm not a big guy, so I wasn't getting any major college. I wasn't really being recruited. Now,
Steven and SC weren't recruiting you. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
No, but actually back then, yeah, I wasn't in that position. But after my sophomore year of junior college, I kind of got invited to go to Southern Utah to play because I went with a couple other of my friends that were more recruited, and I did well enough in preseason to be basically say, hey, if you want, you can redshirt and then play in a summer league, and that will enable you to play on the varsity the next year. Well, again, I don't want to get too deep in it, but the coach that kind of recruited us ended up not even finishing the year. He left for various reasons, and then that was kind of the end of my college baseball career, but that was okay. It was time to move on.
Well, one of the tougher things from a financial aspect is the baseball budget. The scholarships are really divided up unequally, if you ask me, in a way that we'll do the best we can for each kid as well as we can do it. It's a very different type of approach than what I experienced from a football perspective. Did that happen with you, where the money just disappeared and there wasn't enough of it for you to be able to continue? Was that a part of the issue with you?
No, it was like I decided to transfer to Oregon State, and I wasn't really good enough to play at Oregon State, and it was time to, I was just getting into different things, and I don't know if you know what ultimate frisbee is, but I started playing ultimate frisbee once I ended up at Oregon State. So I wasn't really doing anything intercollegiately at that point. Then I started getting into athletics because I still liked athletics. And that's when I began doing sports information stuff.
Well, before that, let's talk a little bit about your experience of the transfer over. You said your grandfather was a physician for the team. You had a neighbor that when you were a kid was a coach there. You had ties with the school anyways. It's close by. You could live at home if you want to and get your laundry done, but still be far enough away to where, you could go to the party and not have to worry about mom checking in on you every time. What was that like for you in terms of just my desire to be home and close to home and go to the school that I've wanted to go to ever since I was a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I was the only one in my family who didn't go straight to Oregon State. So, I spent 2 years in junior college, spent about a year and a semester at Southern Utah. When I came back, it was a time to come back. It wasn't anything other than what I felt like is that if I would have gone to Oregon State right away, it wouldn't have been the same. But since I had been away, when I was coming back, it was almost like a new school. It was almost like, I didn't live at home. I met new people. I got into just different stuff. And I think some of my friends who went straight to Oregon State out of high school, they kept the same friends. And that wasn't my case. I had been to, another state, and I think that was a great experience.
Yeah, in many respects, it is a lesson learned to be away and to develop different relationships and appreciate the qualities that area has, as well as the ones that you had come from, and be able to share that in a way. And you also, from an academic standpoint, Scott, I will say this: you also got 2, maybe 3 years of schooling out of the way. When you went back to Oregon State, it was really on your concentration towards your degree, right? Really some high-end classes that you needed to know what you wanted to do and take classes that would help you and prepare you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually at one point a business major, and by the time I got to Oregon State, I figured out, and through working the sports information, actually I started in the summer, and then finished up during the regular school year with. I had switched and I became a business minor with a technical journalism major. So it was a quicker way to get through, but it was also very helpful because, I much more enjoy writing than I do business.
Yeah. But anyways, in some respects, some of the business, hey, you got to learn how to sell yourself, right? How to help a company sell their products or services. Learning how to apply some of that and being able to do so in a manner that says, you know what, as a journalist, I need to sell my stories. I need to be able to sell my abilities. Did you start interviewing with, not interviewing, excuse me, but from an SID standpoint, did you start working with teams right away?
I did.
They're always looking for help, aren't they? And you're cheap, right? You're on scholarship with that, but go ahead.
Well, when I was at Oregon State Sports Information, I think I was maybe one of the few students that handled the sports full time. There was a gentleman that, it's kind of a harsh business sometimes, and he got laid off, and I took over women's basketball when I was still a student. I did women's swimming, and I did, some sports that they needed coverage. But there were some cutbacks at Oregon State for various reasons, and I was an option, and that kind of piqued my interest. And one thing also that was really nice is when I first started, I got to write the features for the men's basketball game program. So I got to start interviewing people and writing features right away.
Do me a favor. For those that may not be familiar with the sports information and all of the responsibility with the media relation, the statistics, all the records that are responsible for, not only from the players and athletes that are a part of the school at the moment, but, going back to the history and all of that kind of stuff, the publicity, the administration. What for you, if you could describe what are some of the duties, the job duties of a sports information director, could you share that with our audience real quick?
Sure. Probably one of the first things you do when you're assigned a team, usually you're covering a team, is to do their media guide. And back when I started, it was actually a publication and it would get printed. So you would have your deadline to get it done before the season. And ideally, you would send the media guide out to the media. You'd have a mailing list. And so you do this. And a lot of that would be, which I really enjoyed, was looking into the history. Some of it, you would get from prior people who had done the guide, but you would pick out photos, you do the history, and then you would maybe send out a questionnaire to the athletes and they would fill it out, and you do a bio so people could find out about this athlete. And it was fun. You had two different types of athlete. You had the newcomers, so you had to dig into a little bit and find out what they did in high school, whether they were all state or whatever. And then the people that were returning, you'd say, okay, they were all league, or they scored X amount of points, or whatever, it worked. So I kind of enjoyed doing that. And that stems back from seeing those media guides when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Hey, Harper, if I could jump in here for a second.
Yeah.
I want to get to your Oregon time. First of all, there was an athletic director at the Oregon State. What was his last name? I believe my dad was his attorney. I think we were talking about him. He had an Italian name.
Well, there was DeAndros, but
No,
Paul
that
Valenti.
was after him.
Yeah, Paul Valenti is who we talked about.
Paul Valenti. Was he there when you were there?
He was my neighbor. He was a big inspiration in my life because he was friends with my parents. But he was the basketball coach when I was real young, and then he became an assistant athletic director. He went to Oregon State in 1939, then went to the war, and then came back, finished up, and then became an assistant coach for several years. Basically, he was from Tiburon, San Francisco area, came to Corvallis and never left.
Yes, and my father was his attorney.
Okay.
So we knew him quite well, and we used to go whenever Oregon State was playing at Cal. We'd get tickets and see the games. And he had a brother named Val, who was a very temperamental guy, but a really good tennis player. He used to play tennis with my dad at the LeBel Racket Club. To your knowledge, did Paul Valenti play? I believe Oregon State won an NCAA national basketball championship right around the time he was there. Do you know if he was on that team?
Well, they never won the whole thing, but in 1966, he was the coach. And this is kind of interesting, is that UCLA had won the NCAA championship in 64 and 65. But UCLA, this was, Lou Alcindor was a freshman, so freshman couldn't play then. So Oregon State actually won the conference that year and broke UCLA's streak. They won it in 66, the conference. They went and they beat Houston with Elvin Hayes in the first round of the NCAAs, then lost to Utah. But, they had a great season. They finished like 21-7, and that got people real excited. And then UCLA went on their run, maybe five more.
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm a historian, and I want to say that the NCAA started right around 1939, and I think Oregon State won a national championship in basketball. Maybe I'm thinking of the NIT.
No, it was actually Oregon.
You sure it wasn't Oregon State?
Yeah, it was. They were called the Tall Furs, and it was Oregon won the first. Okay. And then again, not to get too convoluted, but the coach at that led the Ducks to the championship, named Howard Hobson, he actually was a coach at Southern Oregon at one time before he went to Oregon.
And I want to ask you just about a couple of players. Because when I was coming up through baseball, I played with a lot of really good athletes who were from Oregon. Danny Ainge was one of those guys who was an athlete playing college and pro sports when I was, moving through the ranks. And I had a catcher in the Cardinals organization who played at Oregon State. I wonder if you know his name. Alan Moore. Does that ring a bell with you?
Yeah. No.
And I wonder if you remember the third baseman at Oregon State in 1981. He would have been a junior or a senior. I don't know if you were there yet. And he hit something like 27 homers for us at the Cardinals in 1981. I can't remember his last name off the top of my head.
Would it be Al Hunsinger?
Yes, it was Al Hunsinger.
So,
it was Al,
so I was,
yeah.
So I was the backup third baseman to him at Len Benton at my junior college. When I was a freshman, yeah, he was ahead of me. I wasn't going to beat him out. So, you know, I was just, yeah, he was on my junior college team.
He was a top prospect.
Yeah.
I remember Wally Backman was playing in Alaska when I was, you know, playing for some in Kamloops, I believe. And I just remember there were players. I remember a high school, Jesuit High in Portland, I believe. Seemed like they always had a lot of good players. Lake Oswego seemed like they had a good basketball team. But there was another question that I have for you, and this is from something you mentioned at the beginning. You said you majored in or studied technical journalism. Now, this is an interesting thing. I'm not sure I've ever even heard of technical journalism.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I want to get into forensic accounting, you know. It's like there is a certain mindset that you decide, I want to get into something that's not necessarily being Ernest Hemingway, you know, looking at the white bull and coming up with The Sun Also Rises, but rather technical journalism. So tell me a little bit about what that is and why did it interest you so much?
Well, full disclosure is that Oregon State didn't have regular journalism. Okay. So you had to have a lot of a minor. So like a science or whatever. So theoretically you could write and explain something in a science in layman terms. You have the ability to write for a magazine or take that expertise that you have and be able to share with people. Does that make sense? But, you know, the thing that's funny is Oregon had journalism, but our student paper at Oregon State was considered way better than their student paper. So sometimes when you have that situation, you get good writers. And I wrote for the Daily Barometer, and we were pretty good. So that kind of helped get me going with the whole writing gig, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, this gets down to, you know, the sports information, because like you say, it's not just the pros. And when I say pros, PROSE, it's the statistics. It's very important. You have to have those statistics correct. And it makes a lot of difference. And it makes a difference in really where a player is scouted, drafted. Another question I have is when you're looking at let's say a high school player, and if he's a really good player, he's going to have a lot of accolades in high school. You read he's Long Beach Telegram Best of the West, or he's all CIF, or he is all state, or he is a third team All-American according to Collegiate Baseball Magazine. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. So how far do you have to dig? Because these kids, they don't always even know everything about their past or what accolades they have or what's on their wall. They might know, I was all league or I was all this, but you know, you really want to get down to the nitty gritty of who these guys are, you know, because when you're looking at these media guides, and I'm like you, first time I saw one of these media guides, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I can remember my high school baseball team, we had a media guide. I'd never seen a media guide. I certainly never had one on a team that I was on, and it just fascinated me. And but yeah, you want to really get down to it. So how far do you have to dig to really get to the entire background of some of these players?
Well, actually, sometimes the coaches would provide me with that because they were getting it at one way or shape or form, and it behooved them to have this player that they have coming in sound good, and you know, but all in the up and up, because you know, a lot of these people are their high school stars, and that's why they're ending up at a place like USC or a place at Cal. they're above average. But then again, you get some people that are recruited walk-ons that turn out to be pretty good too.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, share with me, if you will, Scott, a little bit about the differences when we were talking about the sports information, the duties, and there are many of them. I'm sure you didn't hit all of them, but sports specific, there are what, 20, 25 different sports that any campus can have. Obviously, Title IX is incredibly important for that, but women's swimming, for example, that was assigned to you, you said, when you were first there. I'll be candid with you. I know a little bit about swimming, but from a women's perspective and just following that sport, to make it interesting and to sound like I know what I'm doing and to speak the language that they do about the lap speed and different events and the backstroke and the butterfly and all of the different swims that are a part of it, the different disciplines. For you to be able to absorb in that, was that an easy process for you from an athletic standpoint, or did you have to spend some time doing your own homework so that you could speak the language and talk to the girls in a way that you knew that you were able to share their story in a manner that they were able to describe with you cleanly?
Well, I was very fortunate. It came easy to me because I had some swimming and diving background as well. Like
Okay.
when I grew up. My mother was from Vancouver, BC, and I would spend all my summers in Vancouver area swimming on a swim team, and we swam in the ocean. And 3 people from my team made it to Olympics for Canada.
Wow.
At the 72 Olympics. And so it was cold, put it that way. And so that's why I became a diver, so I could get out of the cold water. But I still had to do my share of swimming.
Yeah.
And I had female cousins that were swimmers, and my siblings, they swam. So I was doing that actually until I was 10. So I had that background. I was lucky.
All right, Scott, you got to tell me. You said it was cold. I'm going to Johnny Carson with you and go, how cold was it? There is something about Vancouver and swimming in the ocean that doesn't jive with a lot of folks. If the water isn't like it is in the Bahamas or in the Turks and Caicos Islands, they're not going in unless it's Caribbean warmth. You're talking about waters that are just slightly above 33, and I'm teasing with you there, but you're in the low 60s, right? Upper 50s for most of the summer?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of in a bay, and, you could barely see downtown Vancouver, but this was a place. And what it was actually a floating, we called it the tank, and it was 2 25-yard pools. I mean, a tank. So you'd swim, and then a diving tank.
Right.
And it was kind of rough, but so we had 2-a-day practices, right? You had to get there in the morning. The morning was especially tough because it'd be cold. But, that's, like I said, that's why I was a diver. But some of these people turned out to be really good. And I think it's because they were tough, because not only did you have the cold, sometimes there'd be seaweed, sometimes there'd be currents. You had to just kind of buck up.
Yeah. Yeah. They say the possibility of swimming out from Alcatraz, it was next to zero. And the guys that were able to do that, they go, hey, they probably didn't make it because the water was so cold. What was that like for you just with the first couple of times? What am I doing? It's summertime and I can't be any colder than what I am right now.
Well, so it was a process because when you were real little, it's called the tide pool. So it was a tide pool. It wasn't as cold. But once you got a certain age, then you had to go swim where it was a little colder. So they kind of worked you into it.
Can you remember a specific day where not only was it cold enough on the outside, in the ambient air temperature, but the water temperature was at a spot where, what are we talking about? What was because it's in Canada, was it a Celsius level that you guys were, anything below 20 is too cold. It was below 10, you know what I mean? 10 degrees.
Yeah. It was the summer. It was a summer club. So it was usually pretty good. But I'll tell you what, if it was really nasty, my mother would let me skip it. It didn't happen very often, and
Right.
It wasn't what they were into. But if it was like just terrible, nah. But a story I like to tell, and I wrote this story out, is this fellow named Bruce Robertson. Just before my last day going there, and I didn't know I wasn't going to go again, but it's 6 a.m. and Bruce Robinson is swimming by himself, training in this cold water. 2 years later, I'm watching the Olympics. Maybe 3 years later, I'm watching the Olympics. He's on the starting blocks. He gets second in the Olympic butterfly to Mark Spitz.
Wow.
And it was this guy I knew, and I interviewed him, wrote the story because it meant a lot to me, and I miss going there because everybody else, yeah, there he is. And so I wrote the story, got to interview him, and then just last summer, my daughter and my wife went up there and saw Crescent Beach again after all these years.
Was it just as cold last year as it was 30, 40 years ago?
Well, here's the deal. Where that tide pool is now a regular pool.
Okay.
They don't swim in the ocean anymore. So it was.
Those lightweight kids today, they can't take the ocean currents and then the temperatures. My goodness.
So that 72 Olympic, those three people I knew, they all got medaled. Only 4 Canadian swimmers medaled total. And 3 of those 4 was from this tiny beach town that swam in the ocean.
That's so cool. I really like hearing stuff like that. That's amazing. And you were a part of it, right? You were right there. And now, as an author, you're telling that tale with paragraphs of grandeur that hopefully embraces that memory and makes it more permanent. Good for you. I love it.
Well, they were so nice. It's in the Crescent Beach Swim Club archives now.
Wow.
My story. So that was fun.
Thank you for doing that. Let's get back to your collegiate experience. You're going to school. You're working as an SID. Did you get the idea while you were there at Oregon State that this is something you want to do?
Oh, yeah. I actually did a little bit of grad school, but it was like, no, this is going to be my profession. And so what I did is just to keep on working. I was a grad assistant for like maybe 1 semester. And then I actually had a chance to go down and be an intern for the Pac-10 at that time conference, media relations office. And I was also
Scott, where was that located at the time?
In Walnut Creek at the time. I think now they're in San Francisco. I mean, now it's a whole different deal. But I was hired for that. But around the same time, I had a chance to be the sports information director at Southern Oregon, and I did that because that was a full-time job.
Sure. Well, let's go through the progression with you in terms of the resume. You were there with the Pac-10 for just a short amount of time then before you took the Southern Utah?
No, I never took that job because I got hired at Southern Oregon. So I was all set to go there in the fall. I went to Southern Oregon and Ashland, Oregon instead.
Okay. So tell us about that experience. You go, and now what sports were you working at Oregon, South Oregon? Well,
I was in charge of the whole thing.
Okay.
But there wasn't as many sports, but, I started in with I did football. I did women's volleyball were the main fall sports. There was a little bit of cross country, and then the basketballs. And I think I mentioned this to Steve. An interesting thing is the basketball coach at Southern Oregon was Pete Berry, who had been the basketball coach at USF when Quentin Daly and the whole program got cut. So after being at USF, and he actually grew up in North Beach, he was the coach at Southern Oregon, and he was a great, great guy. And he actually liked baseball almost more than basketball.
Does that make it easier for you if you've got some common denominators with certain coaches, athletic directors, and players?
It does, but I never had a hard time getting along with these coaches. For the very few people I didn't get along with, and I think maybe they could tell that I was passionate about what they were doing. Yeah. Maybe ask them questions. We're interested in their program because that's kind of what my job was.
There's a difference, in my opinion, between the press and the normal media. You see the disdain of Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick when they're in front of reporters, the way that they talk, and they don't want to answer these questions. The marketing aspect of, I want people to know this about my program, my coaches, and my players. That's a different perspective. So I would think that coaches are willing and wanting to talk to you so that you get the right message. And then you're coach, you sure you want me to tell them that this guy had a knee injury last year? Are you sure that you want me to bring up this? I think it'd be great if we added some things about, so-and-so. You're working with them in terms of telling the story and creating the marketing, the dynamic really that you need to have between a media or even an audience, just your local fans, for them to get to know the players better.
Yeah, I mean, I feel strongly that if something in your program isn't necessarily great, you do more harm if you try to hide that or try to. It's almost better to have something negative but be honest with it. Then the press will respect you, and they'll I mean, that's the way life is. Not everything's going to be great. So if you have a player that's hurt and you're not telling the media that this player's hurt, that's only going to hurt you. I feel strongly that way. And fortunately, most of my coaches were fine with that. They might kind of shake their head a little bit, but then they were good with that. Does that make sense?
It does.
It does make sense, Scott. Let me jump in with an observation. I can tell you for a fact that both Notre Dame and the University of Southern California, in many ways, owe their early greatness, post-World War I, 1920s, 1930s, to their sports information directors. SC had a guy, I believe his name was Al Wesson. Notre Dame also had a very good sports information director. He's the guy who came up with the idea of the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. These were very, very active people who knew how to promote and glamorize their programs. And those two programs in particular built off of each other because these sports information directors made their players look like superstars. They made the experience of being at the LA Coliseum or Notre Dame Stadium something you just wanted to be a part of. And they established relationships with writers, some of the top writers in the country, like Grantland Rice and what have you. And so I can tell you right now that even though for instance, you could see in the 1920s, the University of Alabama, for instance, had a very good football program. The University of Pittsburgh was a major football program. But the programs that jump out at you are USC and Notre Dame. They had a rivalry going with each other. And a lot of that was because they had people who were promoting them, the sports information directors, then the media, USC benefiting from Los Angeles, Notre Dame benefiting basically, I call it Catholic media, big city media, and that kind of thing. So did you ever need to remind a coach, coach, I'm on your side. I'm trying to get what you're doing in the newspaper out into the media so that people will know your successes and future recruits will think about, hey, that's a place I want to go. Because some of these guys you mentioned, the Bill Belichick or some of these other guys, they're grumpy lobster fishermen. Did you ever need to get into that conversation with some of these coaches?
Not really. Most of the head coaches, we started having, and through the Pac-10 conference, we started having media days, and media days even for like women's volleyball. And we'd have the local schools, the St. Mary's, the USF come together. And I think that was a really good way for them to kind of do a little introduction of their team, the coaches speaking. And it was great for the media, but it was great for the players. We'd pick a couple of top players. And it was great for the coaches. Then they kind of started a relationship that they could carry into the season.
Right. Okay. So we're getting a little bit closer to that period of time which our paths cross, which is at the University of California. For me, it was 1991. It was an opportunity to be part of a major college program. It was that last question that I had, or that last time in which I was going to decide what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, because I was a baseball player and I loved baseball. And it kind of always seemed like, well, you really ought to be a coach. And this was like, okay, this is a really top level school. I'm going to go there. As it turned out, I discovered, yeah, I do love baseball as much as I've always loved it, but I love it. I love telling the stories of it. I love writing about it. And this eventually led to, journalism as opposed to coaching. But you had mentioned that you almost went to work at Walnut Creek, and eventually you make the move to Berkeley. And when does this happen for you?
Well, honestly, I was only at Southern Oregon for 4 months, and I really liked it, but I had an opportunity to go to Cal, and I couldn't pass that up because it was, Pac-10. It was kind of the same level. I think having worked at Oregon State helped me. I think my boss at Oregon State had talked to Kevin Renaud, who was the sports information director at Cal at that time. And so, it's interesting because I come to Cal and my first sport is baseball. Well, that year happened to be the worst year in the history of Cal baseball. They were like, 17-43 or something like that, 3-27 in conference. And so leading into the next year, when you helped coach, they turned it around. It was like one of the greatest turnarounds in college baseball because they made a regional. It was huge.
Yeah, I remember, because I remember reading the media guide, and I knew that the team had been 3-27 in league play, but I also knew that they had been to the College World Series only a couple of years before that. And I always knew Cal as a really strong baseball program. My dad played for Clint Evans at Cal. I played against some really good Cal teams when I was in college. Greg Zanino was a good friend of mine. He was one of the all-time Cal players. His brother Gary and a few other guys. Brian Price, there were quite a few Cal stars that I knew, and of course, I'd been the bat boy for Cal in 1969 when their coach was George Wolfman. So I kind of grew up with this whole Cal thing. I sort of blew a lot of people away in my family when I ended up, going to USC, which is mainly graduate work. But I had a lot of Cal background, and so I finally had this opportunity. And early in the season, this is before we were playing any games, we were practicing. Bob Milano was the coach. Bob Milano was a really crusty baseball man, old school guy, something out of the Casey Stengel idea of what a baseball man is. But he had a really good program, and there was a lot of talent. I remember just looking at him and so, Coach, I know you were 3-27 last year, but in my mind and in my eye, my practiced eye, I see a lot of talent here. I see a team that could contend. I see some special guys. And he goes, I agree with you. And I remember there were at least 3 or 4 times during the course of that 91 season in which we reminded each other of that conversation, because the season started and the team had a tremendous amount of ability, tremendous offense and tremendous defense. The pitching was a little bit suspect, but the offense carried, and a lot of great defense. We had a catcher named Mike Harrison, who was a Viking god, with blonde hair, and his father had been an Olympic swimmer, and there was no sport he couldn't play. He was a football star, he was a baseball star, and he had home runs, and he had a gun for an arm. And his teammate from high school was a guy named John Zuber, who was frankly a maniac. On the field, he was so crazy. I remember, now you were not in the dugout, you were in the press box. What was your impression of Zuber? Because he would take his helmet off and he would throw it on the ground. We didn't have wood bats. If we'd had wood bats, he probably would have broken it over his knee. But he was a guy who just wasn't going to let the team lose. And he certainly wasn't going to let the team lose because he had let them down. That was the first impression I had. What was your impression of Mr. Zuber?
Well, definitely feisty, But he was a spiritual leader. And from a baseball standpoint, never seen a left-handed batter go opposite field the way he did. He could hit and take a pitch to left field, even though he's a left-handed hitter, as good as anybody. And then he could pitch. He could pitch, and I think his pitching was more by sheer fortitude, guts, determination. And I'll never forget some of the accomplishments. He beat Stanford in a game that we had to win. And I think it was that 91, or it might have been 92, but he went and took it to Stanford. And, he willed the team to really above average greatness,
Yeah, he certainly did. And in fact, in 92, he practically carried the team on his back all the way to Omaha in the College World Series. And I don't know if you know this, he was actually drafted by the Philadelphia Phillies as a pitcher. Oh. And he told this story on air about a month ago on Take 5 with Steven Travers, in which he said that he had been drafted by the Phillies, and he was in Clearwater, Florida for a sort of a camp before they assemble the rookie league teams. And he was throwing in the bullpen. And he had this was coming off of a 1992 postseason, which he had been worn out, starting and relieving for Cal into the playoffs in the College World Series. And he said his arm was absolutely shot. And he said he was throwing about 81 down in the bullpen. And the Phillies pitching coach said to him, "Oh my God, what have we done? Who is this guy?" And literally said to him, "I understand you can hit." And John goes, "Yeah, I batted 375 and was all conference at the University of California, with some power." And the coach goes, "Oh, thank God. I want you to go take batting practice and tell them I sent you there. And get a first baseman's glove and forget about this glove because you're not going to be pitching." And he eventually made it to the major leagues. So I don't know if you knew that story, but we had a shortstop named Chris Klopinski, excellent defense. We had a right fielder / first baseman named Matt Luke. He was like Harrison. He was built like the Terminator. This guy was always in the weight room. We had a first baseman who was also huge, powerfully built guy. This team, remember, Scott, this team looked more like a football team than a baseball team.
Yes.
Yeah, and we would travel, and we were friends with the first base coach, Bobby Ralston, who is quite a character and still a friend of mine. He's going to be on this show. What are some of your memories of Bob Ralston?
Well, he was great, and he played at Arizona, correct?
That is correct.
And he was a very good player at Arizona, but yeah, I think that again, the 91 team, that was a huge deal to go from the 90 record to 91, and that that kind of led it to 92. I don't think before that Cal had. If I'm right, I'd have to look. I think that was the first time Cal had ever gone to back-to-back NCAA regionals. Was that 91 and 92 team?
Well, I know they were really good, and they went to the College World Series in 1980. That was a team I pitched against. They were really good again in 81. I think they went to the – well, of course, the game was different in 81.
It was harder to make a regional.
Yeah. They were really good in 1981, but that was the year in which Arizona State won the national title. So I think Arizona State captured all the glory that season. So you may be right. You can go back in Cal history. There really are, until Cal went on probation in the late 1950s, they were as good an athletic department as there was in the country. Mm-hmm. They won the very first college baseball national title in Kalamazoo, Michigan, defeating George H.W. Bush and Yale in the World Series. They won a second World Series under George Wolfman in 1957. They had 4 national championships in college football. My dad, being a member of the 1937 team that won the last national title, beating the University of Alabama, the Rose Bowl, 13-0. They won a national title in basketball in 1959. What had happened at Cal, the 2 things that happened sort of really dropped the level of the program. Almost half the teams in the Pacific Coast Conference had gone on probation in the 50s. USC, UCLA, Washington, and Stanford. Well, Stanford had not been on probation because they had done everything that the other teams did, but they ratted everybody out. So they evaded. They were like in the witness protection program. So all the other schools rallied and they built their programs better than ever. UCLA, USC, the John Wooden years, the John McKay years. In Washington had really good football. Cal just became the 1960s. And I was there. I would be on campus and there'd be smoke bombs and there'd be rallies and there'd be anti-war protests. And there just was not excitement for sports. And I think it was still kind of a hangover effect in the early 1990s. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think you're accurate. I actually have a book written by, what was his name? The chancellor wrote about the scandal.
Mm-hmm.
It might be behind me here somewhere.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
What was his name?
I think one of the big buildings or even the square at Cal is named after him.
Yeah, but I am totally intrigued with the history of Cal athletics, and you're absolutely right. You summed it up well. There are some interesting stories, but again, that's what makes athletics and individuals interesting. And despite that, Cal has an amazing history of athletics. And some of these athletes, they're not just your typical, I'm going to be an athlete. They do other things, some good, some bad, but it's makes for good stories. And it's all, Berkeley's a fascinating place.
Well, our locker there were other coaches for other sports who were in that locker. We'd share that locker. Lou Campanelli his locker was right next to mine. And this was actually kind of a golden age for Cal sports. You had the baseball team went to the College World Series in '92. Campanelli was just in the process of recruiting a great player, played for
Jason Kidd.
Jason Kidd was just coming in basketball, and they had a great coach, Bruce. What was his last name? He was the coach. Oh, he later went to Arizona State. 1991, which was the fall of that year, that was one of the greatest Cal football teams of all time.
And Bruce Snyder
really recruited heavily. He had the great star Russell White. He had a great quarterback who's now the play-by-play, or he's the analyst, Mike
Pulowski,
yes, out of Troy High School in Fullerton. I used to park in their parking lot in law school.
Yeah.
But they had a really, really good team, and there was a lot of talent there. And it really looked like Cal was on the cusp, and you were there. What's your opinion about that period of time?
Well, I think the early 90s might have been the greatest era ever for Cal sports. Because like you said, the football was good, the basketball was good, the baseball was good. I think there was some good track and field.
Right.
And again, this is the way Berkeley is. If you recall, there was a hostage situation at Henry's. There was the fraternity burnt, and then 3 people died, and some of the water polo players lost their sweats and medals from being national champions or whatever. There was turmoil and things going on, and despite that, athletics thrived. I mean, it was pretty crazy.
Talk to me about your relationship with Bob Milano. I had mentioned that he was like an old school guy. He was from Oakland. He had played at Bishop O'Dowd High. He told me a story that I think he graduated from Cal in 1966. He'd been on the team. He wasn't a guy who went into professional ranks. He knew he wanted to be a coach. I think he'd started off coaching in high school and eventually became an assistant. He told me a story that he settled down. He brought, as he put it, I had a 6-pack of beer with me, and I settled down at Evans Diamond to see a doubleheader, USC and Cal, circa 1967, 68. Said all of a sudden, boom, this big explosion, cherry bombs, CS gas, cops on, yelling out of megaphones, please disperse the area.
Yeah.
Destroys this doubleheader that he's brought his beer with him and he's got his chewing tobacco, and that's Cal. It was an anti-war protest that had just disrupted everything that was going on campus. And I'll tell you an interesting story about Bob. This is when I was a senior in high school at Redwood High in Marin County. We went to play the North Coast Section Championship. And before the game, a coach, his name was Al Landers, he gathers us and he goes, I want to let you know this is my last game as baseball coach at Redwood High. I'm accepting the job as head baseball coach at the University of California. And we all looked at each other like, holy cow, this is going to Al Landers' last game. We have to win it. We had 2 guys on that team going to Cal. One was Greg Zanino, who was prep All-American, who liked Coach Endress, and I'm sure he was like, oh, that's great. I'll be happy. The other was a guy named Steve Hoffmeyer, who was kind of a malcontent left fielder, really good player, and he was not happy. Oh, no, I got to play for Al Landers. So about 2 weeks later, I pick up the San Francisco Examiner, and it says, University of California has hired Bob Milano as their new baseball coach. Coach Endress had been, let's just put it this way, his ego was such that he could not imagine that anybody else could be made head coach. And he had just made this announcement, too soon. And it didn't go to him, and it went to Bob Milano. He came in there. He recruited a lot of junior college players. His first recruiting class was incredible. He was a very good fundamental coach and a really good recruiter when he set his mind to it. Did he ever, when he was recruiting, did he ever need or get information from you, let's say, find out about this kid who's in Sacramento or whatever? Was that ever up to your job to discover what the background was of any of those players?
Not really, because when I arrived, he didn't need me because he had his sources. Former Cal players would help him out that were now maybe high school coaches. His assistants were good. So he never really did that. But Bob Milano, I was very fortunate to have him as somebody I could work with. And he was like I said, he was the first Cal coach I worked with. So yeah, he was quite the character, and he really did have, he got those people to play for him, and I'll never forget, since we're telling stories, when we in 92 lost our first game against Texas A&M in Gainesville, Florida, he goes, we lost, but if we can win the next game, I think we have a good shot at winning this regional. And back then, the regionals were 6-team regionals, and he was right. Came back, and then we ended up beating Texas A&M because we had gone through the losers bracket. They had to just beat us, and we beat them. Came back and beat them. So he kind of, I knew he was wise before, but that kind of sealed the deal.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun. His nickname was 7 because that was his number. I remember what he would always say. We'd gather us after the game, or before the game, and he was always using the term, "Got to put up some crooked numbers, get some crooked numbers up there." But and I don't know. Did you ever sit in his hotel room after the game and drink a couple beers with him? Because that was a big thing with him. He would be in there, maybe one of his assistant coaches, but his main guy that he would drink a few beers with was the trainer. I can't remember his name. Maybe you knew.
Paul Moeller.
That's right, Paul Moeller. And that was always interesting because he would dissect a game and right down to the nth degree, like, what did we do wrong? Why did we lose that game? This is the decision we made that won the game. And how do we bottle that and learn from that? And those were always very interesting times to be with Coach Milano. He would chew his tobacco and he was just an old school, and he loved the University of California. He had gone there. He'd probably been from an immigrant Italian family in Oakland, Catholic, gone to Bishop O'Dowd. I don't know whether he was the first in his family to go to college or not, but either way, he was just really proud of that whole association with Cal. And he would often say something like, "We don't do that at the University of California. Bob Ralston and I do something wrong." And he would say in this stentorian voice, "We don't do that at the University of California." Yeah. Whenever he referred it to as the University of California, that's when you knew you'd stepped over the line on something.
Yeah.
There was also a third baseman on that team at Cal, Dan Chalowski, a great ball player. His son is Rock Chalowski, who in a couple of weeks may well be the very first player chosen in the major league draft out of UCLA. Did you have any relationship with him? Did you ever interview him or point writers to him to try to get some more publicity? Because he was an All-American, was a heck of a player.
He was kind of established already when I got there, and yes, he was excellent and very. He was feisty like Zuber.
Sure was.
He was an excellent player, and I think Bob Milano really liked him. I think he was one of Milano's favorite because I think he maybe kind of projected a little bit of Milano isms out there, right? He was a tough guy.
Yeah.
And then I think Dan maybe a couple years later might have been the first base coach for 1 year, like maybe 2 or 3 years after you. Just to maybe he had just finished pro ball and he was transitioning to whatever else he went on to do.
Right. Well, he was from the area. He'd gone to Bellarmine Prep in San Jose. He was from the area. He played something like 9 years in the Cardinal organization.
Okay.
He also had a pitcher on that team. He really was not a star player, but he made it to the major leagues. His name was Eric Ludwig.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember him, but he's kind of a name in trivia history. He was traded by the St. Louis Cardinals to the Oakland A's for, drum roll please, Mark McGwire in 1997. I don't know if you were aware of that.
No.
Yeah. I remember we played the Oakland A's in a practice game in 91 at the Coliseum. I think this was before the Bay Bridge series. Mm-hmm. And so the A's were just getting ready to get their season started, and they wanted to have a game. And so we accommodated them. And I'll never forget, we got out there, we're at Oakland, and we're standing in the outfield, and it's Bob Ralston, myself, Al Regier, Dave Lawn, and Bob Milano with Tony La Russa. And I just remember Tony was so giving, he wasn't holding anything back. He wasn't, these are trade secrets I can't tell you about. It wasn't anything like that. He was very helpful. And I saw Tony actually at a Cal football game, maybe 15 years later, and reminded him of that and said, you were just a guy who was really helpful to young coaches. And so anyway, we played Cal that day. We got out there and or not playing Cal, we played the A's that day. We're standing around in the batting cage, and there's Jose Canseco, and he's wearing a muscle shirt, and there's Dave Henderson, who was also a really big man. And they are putting on an exhibition, a home run exhibition. And Canseco's hitting him out, and he's doing all this.
Yeah.
And Henderson's doing the same thing. McGuire is kind of evading this sort of thing. He's hitting the ball just as far, but he's doing it more quietly. And like those guys were just in awe. And later that night, I think I was at Club Sport in San Ramon to work out. And who walks in is Jose Canseco and Esther Canseco, his wife. And I reminded him, he was my teammate at Idaho Falls in the A's organization in 1982. He pretended to remember me. But our team that was a team, and I don't know if you remember this or even at the game, Dave Stewart pitched for the A's. He went 6 or 7 innings, and he had been working on a split-fingered fastball, and he was throwing that thing, and it was nasty. And this was a team, this Cal team, if you recall, we batted, probably hit 330 as a team with power, probably averaged 6 or 7 runs a game. If you beat us, you had to beat us 11-9, right? He just shut us down, and I'll never forget the Cal guys. I'm like, holy cow, it's the major leagues. It's different. So, do you remember that game we played against the Oakland A's?
I absolutely remember that, and I remember the Cal players were just thrilled to hit a foul ball off his shirt. They thought they were in awe, and I do remember that. I have another story about when Cal played the A's. It was about 4 years after that. There was a pitcher for Cal named Jason Ball, no relation to me.
Okay.
But Ricky's still playing for the A's. Jason Ball's out there, beans Ricky right in the head.
Oh, no.
Ricky drops down. We're going, oh, God, Ball killed Ricky. Ricky lays there, pops up, doesn't want to take his base. He was just messing with him. Like, it was great. It was so funny because, it was twice during my 25 years there that the Bears got to play the A's, and the players loved it. It was so great. And your story just, brings back memories.
I don't even remember who Ricky was playing, but I was in the clubhouse as a writer at some point, and Ricky Henderson is in there, and there's someone is quoting scripture, and they're talking about John 3:16, and God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son so that it might be saved. And Ricky goes, well, John may hit 3:16, but Ricky batted 351.
Yeah.
I mean, that was Ricky Henderson.
Yeah.
But okay, Harper, I've been really ringing the old blue bells from the Cal years. You have any particular observations?
Well, Scott, when you get to Cal Berkeley, obviously the competitive level is at the highest. You're in the Conference of Champions. What was it like for you watching these teams play that you were organizing and contributing to and getting the stories out, going against the other 9 teams in the Pac-10 at that time?
Well, so basically with the baseball, when I first started, it was the Pac-10 Southern Division, and there was a Pac-10 Northern Division.
Right.
So Cal was playing 3 games at home against Stanford, and then we'll go later in the season play 3 games at Stanford. So really, and Milano would say this always, that if Cal baseball was doing good against that type of competition, if they could make it into the postseason, they could win it all because the conference was that good. Steve, do you agree with that? I mean, that was.
Well, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It was the best conference in college baseball, probably college sports at that time. It still was at that level.
Yeah.
And it maintained itself at that level really into the 2000s in most sports.
Yeah.
It remained strong in football, became really strong in football under the Carroll years, but it was very strong in baseball during all the years Mike Gillespie was at Cal, and that Bob Milano was at Cal, Marcos was at Stanford. And then eventually your school, the Oregon State Beavers, become a dynasty in college baseball. I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but as long as we're talking about it, how did that happen? Yeah, I mean, this little school, Oregon. I know there were some good players came out of Oregon, and I mentioned that, but it's nothing like the state of California.
Yeah.
It's this school that's wet and rainy, and they bring this. It was a guy named Casey, I believe, built this program into a dynasty. How does this occur?
Well, so there's actually in the Northwest, there's quite a bit of baseball talent, believe it or not, whether it's the state of Washington, Oregon, and then, there's some talent in Idaho, but you're right. It's not like Los Angeles, but it goes back. So I just want to add one thing though. You said you were a bat boy for George Wolfman, right?
Maybe about 8 to 10 games in 1969 when Rocky Schoen was playing there, and they had a shortstop named Corcoran. Yes.
So a friend of mine, Dad was the baseball coach at Oregon State, and one weekend, because Cal and Stanford would come up to Corvallis back, this is way back, and play, and I got to be a bat boy for Cal, and I got to be a bat boy for Stanford that probably same year, because my friend's dad was the Oregon State coach.
Right.
So my friend's dad was named Gene Tenselli, but after that was a guy named Jack Riley, and Jack Riley got the program and actually made a regional in '85, and that was tough for a Northwest team to make an NCAA regional. They had a really good team, and then Pat Casey came around, and one thing about Pat Casey is he made sure that they were fundamentally sound. And that sounds really trite and boring, but it wasn't like made sure. It was like he demanded. So they had a certain amount of discipline, and they had a chip on their shoulder. They had a chip on their shoulder because they felt for years that they got a raw deal about even getting a chance to play in a regional. So once they did, they weren't going to squander it.
Let me tell you, and Harper can attest to this. When an athlete feels like he needs to prove something, that he's maybe not gotten the attention that he should, Augie Garrido built the Cal State Fullerton Titans on that very premise that, hey, you guys are the guys who didn't get the scholarships to UCLA, USC, or Arizona State, that you guys are just as good. And Harper is a guy who, came out of Notre Dame High School and went to Colorado State and worked his way into professional football and created an 11-year career for himself. Does that with a chip on his shoulder, deciding he's going to, right? Am I right, Harper?
Yeah, certain aspects. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. And so that's definitely how you can build a program. I mean, you want to prove yourself. So, but while that is all true, you still have to recruit really good players to maintain a program over a long period of time. Where were Pat Casey's players coming from?
Again, the best players in the Seattle area. He would grab some people from California, but there was, I'm biased, but there's some talent in Oregon, even, through the years. It's just not as many people, as many, but and again, he got the most out of what he had. But a person that played with a chip on his shoulder, John Zuber, because I think he really wished he would have gone he wanted to go to SC.
Right.
I don't think SC had interest, and I think that fired John up to no end.
Oh, well, I don't know if you saw the program that we did with him, which is about 4 weeks ago, but he definitely will tell you all about it. The interesting thing about that interview is that you get John being completely friendly and open and calm, which is not the way he was on the field, because he did have that chip on his shoulder. The way he put it, is that he said, quoting him, "I didn't want my teammates to ever say you didn't give 100% to help the team win. I never wanted anyone to say that." I think also his growing up with Mike Harrison might have had something to do with it. They were best friends. They were the same age. They'd known each other since Pony League or Colt League or something like that. They'd been teammates in high school. Their families were friends. Mike was this natural athlete. I mean, he, touch any ball and he was going to be great at it. And, John was the guy who didn't have that size, didn't have that power. So I think he had to felt, first of all, he was comparing himself with Mike Harrison, and then he gets to Cal. And of course, he had lost his scholarship to a guy named Mike Robertson. Mike Robertson got the first baseman job at USC. Mike Gillespie had gone for. He then offered Zuber a walk-on. You could be a recruited walk-on.
Sure.
And Zuber was being already recruited by the University of Miami and a couple of other schools. And then Cal entered the picture, so he wasn't going to become a recruited walk-on and make his dad pay for USC. His sister, I think, was already going there.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. That idea of the chip on your shoulder.
Yeah.
Harper?
One of the things I wanted to ask in terms of just the competitive nature of sports, sometimes I know I experienced this at Colorado State, the depth was such an interesting level. We had 2 or 3 guys that could play anywhere, and the other schools in our conference had 5. And then if we played up at, like, for example, an SEC or a Power 5 conference, or even in the PAC, there's 9, right? Every guy on the team. Did you feel that way at Cal, that there was some, gosh, we've got 9, but SC has 12, and UCLA's got 11, and Stanford just has a little bit more talent than we do. Is there any, or the Arizona schools, was there any of that from just a competitive standpoint that you felt wherever you were?
Well, it was interesting because in the early 90s, when I was at Cal was hanging with all those teams.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was those teams were down and Cal was up or whatever, but it was interesting because, being up at Oregon State, I always heard, and, you knew about the SCs and the UCLAs. Those were known. And the Cal and Stanfords, well, if you were Oregon State, you might have a chance against the Cal or Stanford. USC, UCLA, that's going to be a bigger, tougher deal. That was just kind of how we felt. But then when I got to Cal, it was impressive. Cal, like we were talking about, Cal in the early 90s was as good as well-rounded program as anybody in the nation.
As was Stanford.
Is that Steve?
It was, and Stanford was as good a baseball program at that time, and they were also good in basketball. I don't know if the coach Mike Montgomery, was there yet. Was he there in basketball yet, or was that later?
I think he was. I think he had just started. Yeah.
And he built a dynasty in basketball at Stanford, at least for a few years. So I think you're absolutely right. I think what was really happening in the 90s, well, USC and UCLA definitely entered a down period. I think it was right around this period that Cal beat UCLA in basketball for the first time in 30 years.
Yeah.
I think it was the first time since their great coach, Pete Newell. Mm-hmm. Since Pete Newell had been there in 1961 or something crazy like that. And that really broke the ice. Oh my God, they just beat UCLA, the UCLA Bruins. And their UCLA, even at that point, was they were still a true blue blood in basketball. USC had some down years, some real down years in football during this period of time. I know that Cal absolutely destroyed them in 1991, like 55-24, with Russell White having a tremendous game. Russell Oh, that's, I was going to say Russell White went to Notre Dame. We went to Crespi, right? LeBel, Harper.
You sure did. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, we had Bill Riddell on. Bill Riddell wasn't your coach at Notre Dame High, was he, Harper?
No, he went to Crespi. He got his first year at Crespi the year after I graduated.
Yeah. Well, I know he's coached at a lot of different high schools in Southern California. But yeah, I completely agree with you, Scott. It was a really strong time for the conference. Baseball as much as ever. In fact, the entire West Coast. Pepperdine had an outstanding program. Right. Fullerton was, God, they were as good as anybody ever during this time. USC was really strong. UCLA, not so much so. The Arizona schools were maybe struggling a little bit. So Cal may have picked up a little bit from where Arizona and Arizona State were dipping just a little bit. Cal was getting some of those guys. But they, Coach Milano in particular was able to get local guys who wanted to stay in the area. Dan Chalowski from San Jose, for instance, the Zuber, Harrison, people like that. Did you you had a relationship with Dave Lawn, our pitching coach? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. Now he was an intense individual. Really trying to build his credentials at that particular time. He was a young coach, but he was a hardworking guy. He'd be in the office very early, stay late, and really was into the psychology of pitching. It was a really interesting period of time for me and for yourself and to know you. But what happened in some of those years after you were at Berkeley?
I'm sorry, what happened after?
Yeah, so in the years we've been discussing this period of time, which I was there, knew you, but obviously that's a big deal for me. So we brought up a lot of that. What was going on in some of those years as we get into the mid 90s, late 90s?
After that time period in Cal sports. Well, Cal
in your career.
In my career, so Cal continued to be good and the water polo. So when I first started at Cal, water polo was one of the sports, and we won 3 straight national championships in water polo in 90, 91, and 93 or 92. Then baseball made a regional in 95. That was a pretty darn good team. Went to Knoxville and didn't win it, but had a good team. And then, it just, the 2011 Cal baseball team is an amazing story. And you probably know something about that. But
yeah,
and Harper, I don't know if you know this, but Cal was going to drop baseball. It was going to get cut. And so they had made that announcement that the 2011 team was going to be the last Cal baseball team. And they announced that in the fall. And so what happens? Cal goes to the College World Series and wins the game at the College World Series against Texas A&M, by the way. We keep on playing them and keep on beating them. But that was an amazing story. And that was that 2011 season was pretty amazing for me personally because I had to juggle the love of the team with not upsetting the administration who wanted to drop the sport that I thought was totally crazy. And so it was kind of it was also the year that my daughter was born. So there was a lot of things happening to me in 2011.
You mentioned a lot of there's a personal story for me regarding that team. What was the name of that coach? He's at Stanford now?
David Esker.
David Esker. So David Esker, he had played at Stanford, but he had taken over from Bob Milano. And then, so as you mentioned, in 2011, due to budget cuts, they were considering dropping baseball at Cal. There was a concerted effort to raise money for Cal. I remember Bruce McGowan wrote about it a lot in the San Francisco Chronicle.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Cal guy. In fact, I think he worked in the SID department just like you did when he was a student there. And they'd raised the money, and they had met. So the personal story is my dad. I'd mentioned he was a Cal guy. He played at Cal. This is June 2011. And my dad is at this point 93 years old, and the only thing he can do is sit in front of a television and watch sports, which he would do. And he would watch any Cal sport that came on. Could be women's basketball, could be water polo, whatever station carried some Cal sport, he would watch it. And he would watch that Cal baseball team get to the College World Series. And I would never forget the smile on his face and the joy that was on his face. And it was the last thing in sports that my dad enjoyed, because shortly thereafter, he passed away at age 93. So I remember I went to a Cal game about a year or so later with my friend Steve Hoffmeyer, and we ran into Coach Esker before the game. And I said, "Hey, Coach, I just want to thank you. You brought a smile to an old blue, my dad, when your team made it to the World Series in 2011. That was the last thing that my dad watched." So that was the last thing my dad watched, and I guess it was the first thing your daughter watched.
Yeah. No, that was quite a year, and it's a story about perseverance. It's a story about, some very admirable people. And, I think the teammates, the team, they bounded together. And there was some, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's some pretty cool, let's see, I think Easton did a video showing the Cal players and kind of leading on to going to the World Series. And it's a really neat video. And if you'd like, Steven, I'll find it for you. I'll send it to you, because I think it put a smile on your face.
Yeah, well, that definitely put a smile on my face to see that it did for my dad.
Yeah.
Cal has always been a little bit of an underdog. I mean, they do have lights at the stadium now. They finally got them up. But you go to Evans Diamond, and it pretty much looks the way it did when my dad played there in
Right.
35 or whatever year it was, or Jackie Jensen played there. And
Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered, why can't they do something about the interior of Memorial Stadium? Because you walk up those steps, they're the same steps that Brick Muller walked. And it's nothing but dirt. The whole facade, the whole area is dirt. I mean, can't they plant something there?
Yeah.
Or put something there? And the place looks the same as. Not only that, Memorial Stadium sits underneath the Hayward Fault, and it's just been waiting forever for a major earthquake to just dismantle the place.
Yeah.
And it just seems like Cal has always been just a little bit on the outside looking in, but they've always had that attitude. Hey, we're going to compete. What's your feeling about the Atlantic Coast Conference? I have my idea on that, and it's not very good, but how do you feel?
Well, I don't like it. I mean, I think it's crazy, and I wish both Cal and Stanford were able to, or are able to come back to the West Coast, because for a lot of reasons, and same with SC and UCLA. I mean, but I think obviously USC and UCLA are in a much better situation. Not having to go all the way to the East Coast. It's just crazy. It's just not good.
Yeah, not only that, really, especially in football, and this would apply to really every team in the Pac-10 or the Pac-12 back in the day, those road trips were really social events. If you were at Cal or Stanford, that trip down to Los Angeles was a major road trip. It was 6 hours, 7 hours in the car, or you could fly down. And, you'd go down there and have a great time. And I know that for USC and UCLA fans, they'd come up to play Cal or Stanford, and they'd stay in one of the nicer hotels in San Francisco. The band would play at Union Square. And it was just a big deal. You can go back to John Wayne and Ward Bond coming up to San Francisco, the Trojan Special, up it ran adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, going to San Francisco for these games, some of the partying that they did. But that's all gone, the game has changed. I mean, I was recently at the Cape Cod League, and I was asking one of the coaches about travel arrangements, because they really don't travel in the Cape. Every team is within no more than 40 or 50 minutes of each other. You don't have to go to a hotel and stay in a hotel. So what do you do in terms of providing meals for the players? And he basically looked at me and goes, "Oh, these guys make more money than I do. They're all on the NIL, and they're, 50,000, 250,000, more or less. It's, some of these bigger programs. So it is all a landscape but these are things that I think it's one of the reasons our show is a good show, because we don't really get into that so much as we get into the nostalgia of sports. People your age, my age, Harper's age, we get back to the 70s, the 80s. These are the years that were formative for us, that we love to talk about, and that's one of the reasons we had you on this show. But Harper, we don't want to take up too much of Scott's time. Any particular ideas you want to convey at this point?
Well, we didn't really go into the politics or the decision makings that sometimes happen in the administration, different from the programs itself. But could you please? We did have a little bit of fun before the show started. The tree guy that was up in the willow, whatever the tree was, and they were thinking of doing some expansion at the stadium there on the football side, and one of the students ends up just living in the tree for a while. There's some goofy things that happen every now and then anywhere, but as we said before the show, some places would never allow for something like that, right? You can't mess with Toomer's Corner and the big tree that they throw the toilet paper around at Auburn. But tell us a little bit about the background of that story.
Well, so the fellow's name was Zach Running Wolf, Zach Brown, and he went to Berkeley High. So he's friends, and I knew him. I actually played ultimate Frisbee with him. And he was never a student at Cal, but he got this group, and they were protesting the fact that they were going to cut old growth. The trees, that there used to be a nice tree area on the west side of the stadium. Well, turns out that wasn't really old growth anyway. Those were planted, but it didn't matter to him. They were protesting the expansion, the cutting of the trees. And so he and a group of people started living in the trees, kind of like Swiss Family Robinson or something, and would have zip lines or whatever to bring food up. And they protested that successfully for the longest time. And then they finally got, that broken down. And I remember my wife and I, she worked at Cal. We actually met in the Bay Area. We watched the very last person get taken down, basically, because this person was in a tree and they started trimming the branches off the tree. And the guy was up there, and it was kind of a symbolic. The last guy there, and they got him down. So there's a lot of stuff in between that, but that's general gist of the story.
Yeah. Interesting, strange, and adventurous all at the same time. You don't have to have an opinion on it just to know that there's a guy that was literally living in a tree doing the best that he could to try to preserve and keep it from being cut down. But, the technology of the day and the recruiting aspect, the amount of money that's spent just to make your grounds look good, or the stadium sparkle just a little bit so that a good one might end up going there. The specific advantages that you have from being able to have Wi-Fi in your stadium, you know what I mean? Just certain things that you got to be able to do nowadays in order to make the fans happy, where technology and sometimes where old trees don't always collide successfully.
Well, I think part of it was that the state was requiring the stadium to get renovated.
Yeah.
They didn't have a choice because of it being on a fault line. Well, and Cal decided to, like you're saying, you want to make it so it's something that recruits would thrive and enjoy looking at. So they spend a lot of money, and they're, I think, around the same time, and I might be getting my facts slightly wrong, but there's also a cutback in state funds for athletics, for actually higher education. So the combination, they had to fundraise, they had to spend a lot of money. I think to a certain extent, Cal is still suffering from the amount of money they had to pay to fix the stadium. So, it's kind of crazy. Another crazy thing about Cal.
Well, you throw in the Stanford equation too, where the old stadium there at Stanford, which hosted a Super Bowl, by the way,
right?
You had the capacity, it had at least 70,000, probably close to 90 when it was full. And granted, there was some bench seating in the end zones, but nonetheless, it did host a Super Bowl. Yeah. They decided to close that down and go with the smaller on-campus stadium. And it looks like it's full all the time. But from a technology standpoint, Stanford joined the 21st century. Cal has tried, but unsuccessfully been able to renovate the way that they want to. And you're a part of all this. I mean, I'm not asking you for, your specific opinion, but you have one. This is what we were trying to do. This is what the school was trying to get accomplished. And there's so much red tape that can get in the way. Can you share any of those types of, not just stories, but just some of the dilemma that was going on between the state of California, the president and chancellor of the school, and the board that's a part of that, and just trying to remain competitive and get the facilities that you need in order to play in the 21st century?
Yeah, I don't know the exact details, because there again, when I was working there, my job was to, to a certain point, play the hand as far as we're going to do what we can do. We're not going to bellyache, but all this stuff was in the background. There's always, and Cal's always been a little bit like that, because honestly, there's a certain amount of people at Cal that really think that intercollegiate athletics is a waste, or is being too much money is going into it. That's not really what Cal is about. I think maybe that's the case at Cal more so than, say, in Alabama. There's just that you don't want to lose the academic aspect of this university. And if athletics starts doing certain things that is taking away that academic aspect, that's bad. And, honestly, through all the history of Cal, there has been situations where there's been scandals, academic scandals, as far as athletes getting taken care of when they shouldn't have. But that happens at a lot of schools. Like, nobody has been unscathed, I guess.
I can't prove this. I do remember hearing, I may have read the story, and if I read it online, it's true. But there was a student at Alabama when Nick Saban was there that gets up in front of his Psychology 101 professor and says, our head coach, I read in the newspaper, he's the highest paid individual in the state of Alabama. He's making $9 million a year. We should protest this. Who's with me? And nobody said anything. And the professor sits the kid down and says, do you realize, young man, that our football team helps raise over $100 million a year? And the reason that your tuition is as low as it is here for an out-of-state kid like you are is because of all the additional money that's brought in through our athletic program. Our coach is only making a tenth of what some other coaches are making in retrospect to the amount of money that we bring in. And from a business perspective, this professor shot down the idea, hey, he's making too much money. Kid, you have no idea what you're talking about. And then sometimes academics and academia get in the way of business, of running a school, and schools are businesses. And the way that they make money in many respects is by bringing people back on campus to watch the games, whether it be basketball, baseball, football, whatever it is, and their events. And you have homecoming for a reason, to bring people back and to remind them what's good about it. I'm not saying Cal isn't doing it right or wrong. I'm just asking your opinion. Everyone can do a better job, right? If they were doing the best job, we wouldn't need anybody. But what could Cal do in your mind's eye to kind of enhance and still keep academia happy, but yet you also had the ability to create a better environment for the fans and a place where the kids want to come and play and excel and win championships.
Well, I've often thought that Cal has always, a good model for Cal would be Michigan, because it's a respected academic school and it's a big state school. I don't know, Steve, if you agree with that, but I thought at the time, that, yeah, there's elements that are holding Cal athletics back. People who don't understand kind of what you say, that athletics brings money for the whole university. Even at Oregon State, when Oregon State had their good basketball teams in the early 80s, people come to a school that aren't necessarily sports fans, but they'll go to that school because there's excitement on campus.
Yep.
And Steve, do you agree with that? That, I think
the only kickback to that idea is the way the money gets. Like, for instance, I know this about USC. You generally, if you want to give money to USC, you have to write a check more or less to the University of Southern California, period. And if you try to say this is for the baseball program or the basketball program or NIL for baseball or whatever, you're not really allowed to do it. Just a couple of years ago, I wanted to pay for Bill Spaceman Lee's travel expenses to come to the USC baseball dinner. He said, no, you can't do that. You have to write one check, and it's going to be dispersed into USC's general fund, and they're going to decide. And I've been told that the way SC's doing it right now, just to talk about USC, is they have a lot of debts because they have renovated the Coliseum, part of that for football to meet Lincoln Riley's desires to make it a more modern stadium. Part of it also in accordance with what they're trying to do for the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And the word I'm getting, and I'm no longer an insider, which I once was, but the word I'm getting is until they've paid those debts, they're not really going to have NIL money, let's say, for baseball. And maybe they do for basketball, and they certainly do for football, but it's going to go to football. So getting back to what you're talking about, I don't know how much of that is filtered back to academics.
Well, when they were threatening to drop Cal baseball, there was 5 teams that were getting dropped, and they were supposed to theoretically be able to pool their money together. But then it gets like, well, let me back up. So people wanted to donate to Cal baseball. They couldn't. They were told same thing.
Yeah.
No, it has to go into one big group. And so what they do when there's those 5 programs, well, they go, well, Cal baseball didn't fundraise enough, so they're still on the chopping block. But we'll bring back a couple of these women's sports. So men's baseball, there's no women's baseball, but baseball and men's gymnastics, they were still out of luck. And the Cal baseball donors are going, wait a second, we're the biggest group of donors into this whole thing, and you're going to leave us out? That just wasn't right. Finally, they were able to get enough money and save the sport. Yeah,
well, the thing about college baseball, of course, I think college baseball is now becoming a really big business in the South, not in the West, but in the South. I don't know whether it's in the Midwest or any other part. Southeastern Conference, it's big business, and I think it's paying for itself. But the one thing about college baseball at most any school, you're going to have alumni who played at that school who did well professionally. A place like Cal has a lot of major leaguers who were very successful. Any Pac-10 school or old Pac-12 school has a lot of major league players, alumni, who made a lot of money and are big name people. And that's one thing about baseball that probably differentiates itself from the other so-called lower sports, whether we're talking water polo or swimming or what have you. So And there's another factor, and just getting back to Harper's talking about the tree and the old growth. One thing I will say, the Memorial Stadium in Berkeley is one of the most beautiful settings in all of college sports. It's up there with the Arroyo Seco in Pasadena. Keith Jackson always said he thought it was the most beautiful setting in sports. It's set on a plateau into a hill, sort of in a hollow with beautiful redwood trees all around it, and some residences almost overlooking the stadium. And it really is a beautiful location, and you really want to be able to maintain that and try to, if you're going to do anything in terms of fixing up the stadium, want it to be, shall we say, in concord with its location, its environment, because it is a beautiful environment, But I definitely think they can do better than those big piles of dirt that you walk past as you're. Not to mention, they really ought to have some electric stairwells, for people, because half the people who go to these games are like old blues who graduated, 1950, and they're 90 years old. And walking up those stairs is not easy. That stadium is not an easy stadium to be around in, and it still has benches. And I'm a tall guy, and you're sitting there, and your knees are up against the guy.
Yeah.
There's a lot that could be done, but what have you.
Yeah, beautiful spot.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for sharing with us the way that you have. What's in your plans now? What are you doing? You've been there for 25 years at Cal Berkeley. What keeps you busy now? You said you've been writing some things, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so living in Madison, I actually coach ultimate frisbee, but also I write for the Cal Alumni magazine. So the last issue, I wrote a couple stories talking about Fernando Mendoza a little bit, and the editor of the Alumni magazine is a friend of mine, and actually wrestled at Oregon State briefly. So, he understands athletics to a certain degree, and it's just I've had a chance to write. I wrote a baseball story for the magazine. I wrote the last major story I wrote for the magazine was about the Cal Golf program, which, interestingly enough, had been cut in the 80s, had the fundraiser way back, and now ended up winning a national team championship as a guy named Colin Morikawa, Max Homa, two guys that are doing quite well in the PGA. So
Morikawa did well in the Open just last weekend.
Right. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm doing to keep associated with Cal. And my family, like I said, my wife and daughter visited about a month ago, early May.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your contribution to California sports, not just the University of California, but being involved in that. You played at South Oregon. You began your career there as well. Oregon, your Utah ties, everything around that. The business of sports, and I've said this, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take one little rabbit trail before we go. In the real world, if you told anybody that you had a knee injury and violated HIPAA agreements, you'd have lawsuits left and right. But in the sports world, knowing about that knee surgery and how it's going and whether or not the guy's going to be able to play is critical information that absolutely, it's private, but it has to be public at the same time, obviously, because the bettors and people that are wagering on sports, they have to know stuff like that. But for all of your involvement and the great stories that you were able to tell today, and the ones that you didn't have time to, and the other ones that are yet to be revealed, we'd love to have you back on sometime. So thank you so much for what you've done.
Well, I appreciate it, and this was a lot of fun for me. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Harper. There's our 2011 team. That's me in the old Evans Diamond press box. So,
yeah. And you were up there with Big Ed Zuber for a number of years.
Yeah, and he was great. And even when John was no longer coaching at Cal, he hung in there, and and Pat Murphy came up one time, and Pat Murphy, now the manager of the Brewers, and said, Ed, you're my favorite announcer in the league. So I'll never forget that. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you really are a glue that helps to keep the broadcasting, the Cal side, obviously, any of their opponents at a national level. Whenever ABC or CBS rolls their trucks onto the campus, NBC for basketball, there's a reason that you're a critical component of that, to help make the ease between people that are just coming in for a visit and being able to act like they're comfortably well informed about everything that's going on with that specific sport on that specific day, and with all the athletes that they'll be talking about. Those aren't always easy meetings to make and to make smooth, but for being able to do that for as long as you did, obviously it speaks volumes to who you are and what you're all about. So thank you again for your gift and your contribution to college athletics.
Well, thank you, and give me the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We greatly appreciate it. Well, we want to thank everybody for being a part of the show today. If you enjoyed the show, just please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and let us know what you think. We always appreciate your feedback, and we enjoy hearing from you. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button for notifications. And in case there's another episode, we want to make sure that you never miss that. So your support really helps the channel grow, and we greatly appreciate it. Final words from you, Steven.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, let's, if you like this show, like and subscribe. But I want to say thank you, Scott Ball, for taking this much time out of your day to talk to us about your career and sports and Cal and our shared experiences. It was a real trip down memory lane. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it greatly as well. I'm Harper LeBel. Our producer is Logan Landers. We appreciate everybody being a part of the show here today. Thank you so very much for tuning in, and have